Oh, okay.
And we're recording. Yeah. So, so I'm not a reductionist in the sense that I think that all of the truths can be written in the language of fundamental physics, or in the language of the natural sciences, or in the language of the natural sciences and the social sciences. I think that, I'm not sure whether you got this bit when we dropped out, that there are lots of different scales on which you can view the universe, from the very small to the very large, and the language that's appropriate, or the theory that's appropriate when you're looking at a particular scale, varies. And there's no sort of translating from the language of one scale to lower scales. So I think that at least in part, answers your question about reductionism.
I wanted to ask you this question from the point of view of a theist, of a somewhat philosopher that doesn't understand this. I never understood these things, but if anyone can explain that to me, you could be the one. The terms, philosophical terms, brute facts and brute contingencies. That's a term I never heard of before, but I heard you say it in the debate with William Lane Craig on whether math points to God. William Lane Craig used the term happy coincidence, and you said if he was familiar, or if he was okay with using instead the term brute contingency. What are these facts? What are these terms? Because in my opinion, this is intuition, I don't have a good argument about it, but it seems to me that if you say brute facts, this is the same as saying I don't know how to explain this. This is not explainable. And for the brute contingencies, I do agree that it is the same as saying it is a happy coincidence, which is basically, again, the same as saying you cannot explain it, or it is inexplicable. How is your...
So I'm thinking of the terminology as metaphysical rather than epistemological. So it's not a question about what you can I was going to say it's not a question about what you can explain, but in a way it is. So the brute contingencies are ones for which there's no explanation of why they obtain. They just do, but there's no answer to the question, why do they obtain? And similarly for the brute facts. And I think that one of the goals of theorizing is to minimize how many brute facts and brute contingencies you appeal to. I don't think that you can get rid of them altogether, because I think that there is chance, there is indeterministic causation. And when you have indeterministic causation, you end up with certain things that you can't explain. So suppose that X gives rise to A, but it could have given rise to B. It's just a matter of chance that you got B rather than A from X. Then there's no answer to the question, why did X give rise to A rather than to B? That just comes out as a brute contingency or a brute fact. And I think wherever you've got indeterministic causation, you have these brute facts or brute contingencies. I don't think that you want to have any other brute facts or brute contingencies apart from the ones that you need for indeterministic causation. And for example, if you believe in a certain kind of freedom, libertarian freedom, then you're going to have these brute contingencies, because there'll be situations like where someone does A, could have done B, but if you ask why did they do A rather than B, there'll be no answer to that question. Or if there was an answer, then we'd be going back down the deterministic.
Their behavior wasn't according to the NAP, the non-aggression principle. That would be their answer, yeah.
Right. So that's what the terminology of brute facts and brute contingencies is about. And I think that when William Lane Craig wanted to talk about a happy coincidence, that's what he was really talking about, that there would just be no explanation for why you got A and B.
But what was your, he put that as his central argument in that debate. You debated about whether math points to God as a sort of best explanation. So he didn't say it follows necessary, or he just said that math is the best explanation, that God is the best explanation for math. But what was your counter argument or counter attack to his argument? Did you say, did you claim that no, it's not true what he says, or what was your counter attack?
So he thought that, following Wigner, that there's some mystery about the applicability of math to the world. And we spent a lot of time arguing about whether there really is a mystery there or not. And I'm not sure that there's a mystery, but there's a very short answer given what we talked about before, which is that it's necessary that maths has applicability to the world, because there's no possible world where it doesn't have applicability, given that every world starts the same way and they only differ because chances play out differently. So the laws are the same, the equations are the same, and so on. So on my account, I have a very straightforward answer to the question why maths is applicable to the world. And it's not one that is kind of made up ad hoc. It just follows from the more fundamental metaphysical story about the range of possibilities. Okay, so that's kind of the short answer. So then it's no happy coincidence, right? It's something else.
Yeah, it's probably similar as our analytical philosophy started, as Frege wanted to answer the Kant's question about math, and the answer of our forefathers of analytical philosophy was to, or at least they tried to answer it as being derivative from logics. This was the start of analytical philosophy, if I remember exactly from my studies.
So yes, you remember it correctly. So Frege kind of thought that you could reduce mathematics to logic. It turned out that Gödel showed you can't reduce mathematics to first order logic. And more recently, I think it's been shown that you can't reduce mathematics to second order logic either, that you need some mathematics in order to get the rest of mathematics out of logic, just sort of what are recognizably logical principles. You need some mathematical principles as well. So I think that you're quite right about what Frege was trying to do, though. I think that there are very few people that think that he succeeded. There are people who think that kind of set theory is much the same thing as sort of infinite higher order logic, but set theory just is maths, right? So
this is what I wanted to ask you. Since there are vast metaphysical debates in contemporary analytical philosophy, it's obvious that a contemporary analytical philosophy has gone astray from its beginnings or parts of the beginnings in logical positivism, verificationism, and so forth. What is the current state or consensus between philosophers, analytical philosophers, about verification principle? What do you guys, in the majority of you, agree on? What is the best standard, or what is the best description, or what is the best definition verification, because the minimal standard of verification principle is probably presupposed in analytical philosophy even nowadays, isn't it?
So I think that there's some people who are still kind of interested in what Carnap was trying to do back in the 30s and 40s. And so there's some reconsideration. But across, I mean, if you think about analytic philosophy as a rather broad label, I think that there are very few analytic philosophers who sign up to anything that looks much at all like the principles of the Vienna Circle. And in particular, there aren't, I think, any who sign up to anything much like Ayer's principle of verification, the way that he formulated it. The labels in philosophy are kind of weird. So there was a time when people really cared about whether you got called an analytic philosopher or something else. But I think since the 90s, at least in many parts of America, Europe, Australia, people actually don't care that much about the labels. There are lots of people who read across disciplines and now I mean like they read widely in the sciences or the natural sciences as well as doing philosophy, but they also read across philosophical traditions. So people read sort of Confucian texts and they read things that people might have thought of, you know, they read Husserl or Brentano or people that you might have thought of as being heirs of different tradition to the analytic tradition. And it's much more, things are much more mixed, I think, than they once were.
I remember hearing years ago your current debater, William Lane Craig, saying that he would believe in God even if all the arguments, or even if there were no good arguments for the existence of God. And that implies that his psychological theist, in a sense. If you can correct me if I'm wrong or this is not correct to say about him, but are you in a sense a psychological atheist also, in the sense that you would be an atheist even if there were good arguments for the existence of God? And the next question is, can you imagine a good argument for God, or can you imagine what would be a good evidence or a proof for the good? What would persuade you to be a theist?
Okay, so there's a couple of different issues there. So one question really is about the power of argument and the extent to which even philosophers' beliefs are based on argument. I think that philosophical positions are theories, and theory is prior to argument, and philosophers rarely believe things because they've got arguments for the things that they believe. In this respect, it's kind of like everybody else. That doesn't mean they don't have reasons. It doesn't mean that they don't have evidence. It's just that reasons and evidence are one thing and arguments are quite another. So I don't view it as a criticism of Craig if he thinks that he would be a theist regardless of the arguments, because, and this is another part of my view, I think that kind of persuasive philosophical arguments, good philosophical arguments, are very hard to find. It's very rarely the case that, you know, and if you think about the philosophical debates, say, I mean, there's the debate about the existence of God, but say debate about the existence, whether we have freedom or not, or the question about the relationship between mind and body, philosophers are no closer to reaching agreement on the answers to any of these questions than they were 300 years ago. If there were good arguments, that wouldn't be the case. If there were good arguments, there'd be convergence of opinion. So I think it's kind of obvious that there aren't good arguments. But I don't think that it reflects badly on philosophers that they go on holding the beliefs they do, because it's a matter for judgment. You weigh everything up and, you know, you believe as you do. And you probably, that's a reasonable thing to do. Okay, so that was one question. But you asked me a second question. I've forgotten what it was.
Oh,
So
yeah. If I remember, I asked you if you were a psychological atheist, in a similar sense as Craig is a psychological theist.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that I'm kind of rejecting that distinction. I think that, I mean, just to repeat what I said a little while ago, that you can spend your whole life thinking about whether we've got freedom or whether, you know, what's the nature of mind or something like that. And if you get a bunch of philosophers, they come up with diametrically opposed, you know, radically different views about it. I don't think that shows that any of them are irrational. It just shows that these are very difficult matters and you can kind of be reasonable in your exercise of judgment and arrive at very different positions from the positions that other people arrive at. It's not that there's anything particularly psychological about this. It's more just that it's really difficult. There's so many different decision points where you could go one way or another. You end up wherever you do.
Yeah, I just started reading a book. I don't remember the author. I bought it a couple of years ago, but then I didn't read it, and I just started reading it about what philosophers know. It's on analytical philosophy from an analytical philosopher. I don't remember the name, but yeah, there's a question about whether even the most undisputed arguments in the history of analytical philosophy were basically at the end not arguments at all, but intuitions or rhetoric, if I may say. What's your opinion on that?
So I think that intuitions are just beliefs, right? So I'm inclined to think of us as having theories and we just apply them. When we enter into a discussion, we just tell people what we believe. And then you know what other people think and you can kind of understand what they say, coordinate it to the things that you say, the things that you believe. So you can kind of make predictions about what they're going to say about other topics if you know them well enough, even though they diverge from the things that you yourself want to say about those topics. So it's not that there's no role for argument in philosophy, and it's not that there are never successful arguments. So I think that when Russell wrote his letter to Frege and said, your theory is inconsistent, Russell was right. But that hardly ever happens, right? There's no arguments about big disputes in philosophy of religion where somebody's written a letter like Russell's to a major philosopher, you know, like imagine Leibniz, I mean, this is not possible, but imagine Leibniz writing to Hume and saying, Hume, I'm sorry, your position's inconsistent and here's the reason why. That just doesn't happen.
Dr. Oppy, I thank you once again for accepting my invitation. Thank you for your time. It's been an honor. I hope you do a lot of good job you did till now in years to come, and I hope I can ask you for a conversation another time again.
Hey, thanks very much. I've enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it
so
too.
Yeah, so sure, we can have another chat at some point if you want, somewhere down the track.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
So what's the background? Are you sitting in your garden? Or?
Yeah, it's garden. I wanted to set up a background, but I decided for a natural background.
Yeah, so it's nice. So the weather's not too bad then.
No, it's like Australia. I'm joking. It sounds like Australia.
Yeah, it's July, so it's midsummer, right?
It's midsummer. We have 25 till 30 degrees Celsius, so it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, I'll see you later.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.